Hey folks, it's been a while since my last video. I hope all of you are doing good. In this video, I wanted to answer the question about why Azure Cosmos DB for developers, and as a developer, what exciting features that Cosmos DB provides out of the box. Also, I will talk about how to interact with Cosmos DB with any of your favorite programming languages. Let's jump in. So why Cosmos DB especially for developers? When you look through a developer lens, first of all, you know Cosmos DB is a fully managed service, and that's a no-brainer. And it can be very attractive for many customers. Cosmos DB supports data models including document, key value, graph, and column family. So it's interesting to a lot of customers with existing applications or platforms. There are multiple supported open source APIs and multiple supported development language. With this support, you will be able to go from infrastructure as a service to a PaaS, which is a managed service, with no or minimal code changes. The other thing from a developer standpoint is that Cosmos DB being schema agnostic, which is very attractive, and again some of the service fundamentals such as global distribution, multi-master, which helps a lot of developers out of the box to replicate the data and handle concurrency automatically. And some of the common features that comes with any databases such as scalability, consistency, and indexing are also provided out of the box without any manual work. Cosmos DB's availability is something that helps the developers so that they can focus on the application and less focus on plumbing the underlying infrastructure. Cosmos DB also provides a great caching capability. For example, in a web application or any other sort of APIs that developers are building, Cosmos DB provides a key value store, which makes a great cache. And also we recently added this integrated cache in the SQL API so that developers can cache their repeated query, which reduce their RUs, and also it provides high latency for their applications. Data security on the other side is the important thing for developers and for the customers. Cosmos DB makes you to bring your own key, which helps a lot of security scenarios in the enterprise level. And also we have enabled role-based security access level so that you can control the data to whom which you want to give the access to. Also, other thing is that Core SQL API supports for querying the items using the structured query language syntax, which provides a way to query the JSON objects that developers heavily interact in web applications. Of course, for the developers, we have stored procedures and user-defined function, which is really a big plus for some of the new developer communities. Last but not the least, developer experience is something that we fully focus on Cosmos DB. We provide you the ways to try out Cosmos DB for free, as well as tools and extension to spin up your local environment without any cost. I will cover those in a separate video. Let me talk a brief about what are the different options for developers to use the Azure Cosmos DB for development and testing at free of cost. This decision tree will help you to analyze which option could be best for your scenario. These are fundamental questions that you need to ask yourself before choosing any of the methods that I have explained here. If you do not want to deploy your application to cloud, and if you already have an existing Azure account, the first option is the Azure Cosmos DB free tier, which makes you to easily get started or develop and test your applications, or even you can run some small workloads such as dashboards or any application for free. If you are new to Azure and doesn't have a Azure account, the next one is the free account, Azure Cosmos DB free account, which comes as a part of the Azure free account, which offers Azure credits and resources for a certain time period. Azure free account offers 25 GB and 400 request units of provision throughput for the entire year. The advantage is that you won't be charged even if you integrate with other services. Once you are happy, you can upgrade your free account from free to a production account. So these are the two ways that you can try when you're building production level accounts. The second question is that if you want to try in a non-prod environment, this cloud option makes you to build a shared throughput database with up to 25 containers. You will get free access for 30 days, which can be renewed, but you won't be able to move your database to a production environment. We recommend this option if you want to test out the features and performance of Cosmos DB, but we do not recommend to use this in a production app. The final option is the non-prod environment, is the Azure Cosmos DB emulator. So you can run your application locally, test code as much as you want with no cost. The emulator uses Azure Cosmos DB API and makes it easy to deploy your application to the cloud with simple update to the connection string. Also, with the recent version of Visual Studio, you have the Cosmos DB image as a container. So whenever you want to have the integrated environment, you can spin up a Cosmos DB instance with your application, and Visual Studio will makes it available out of the box. So there are 4 ways to build your application with no cost on Cosmos DB. So choose the free option that is best suitable for your needs. Let's move along. Let me talk a bit about how we can write our code to talk to Cosmos DB. Let's dive into some of the terminologies. These are the different ways to interact with Cosmos DB. Let's look at what are those actually mean. For those who are not from the developer background or new to these terms, here API refers to the Cosmos DB underlying APIs. With this, you can really get into granular level access about the underlying infrastructure, but that comes with some of the responsibility for you as a developer to do a lot of other works. Second one is the SDK. SDK stands for Software Development Kit. Essentially a library that lets you as a developer so that you can bring in your code, and it hides a lot of details so that you just really don't want to worry about every single time you want to integrate with any application using Cosmos DB. The SDK wraps all the details and it does a lot of heavy lifting. The difference is that APIs are at more low level and SDKs are at very high level, so that it abstracts away a lot of things. There is also an ability to use the ORMs. ORM refers to the Object Relational Mapper. If you are familiar with SQL world or relational world, this is something that you must be aware of. Finally, if you are planning to use one of the open source APIs such as Cassandra, there are drivers out there that you can leverage in your platform in order to connect to Cosmos DB, the underlying APIs. For example, you might need to have JDBC driver to have something with the Java backend to be able to connect to Cosmos DB Mongo API. Finally, I have list down here the integration. Sometimes it could be developer centric, and most of the times it can be non-developer centric because of the fact that you can have integrations when you are doing migration. That's why I have separated it out from the rest of the bullet point that I have listed. I have got list of things to tell about APIs, especially with Cosmos DB context. You have to choose one of the Cosmos DB underlying APIs. That could be Mongo, Cassandra, SQL, Gremlin, or Table API. There is also Cosmos DB REST API, which you need to differentiate from the underlying API that I mentioned about Mongo API, Cassandra API, or SQL API, or Gremlin API. So developers use these REST APIs in general to provide a way to programmatically access the Cosmos DB via HTTP calls. So if you are a programmer who have heavily used REST API, you know how to do this via HTTP protocol. There are 2 REST APIs as you see in the slide in the Cosmos DB world. First is called as the REST API, and you would use this to work with resources and data inside the Cosmos DB account. We also provide something called as Resource Provider API for working with accounts and keys. Let's dive into some of the details. First is about the REST API. This is the reference for our documentation on the REST API. You can refer. With this REST API, you can work with databases, collections, documents, stored procedures, and user-defined functions for the SQL API. You cannot use this to manage Cosmos DB account or keys. That's what we talked about earlier as the Resource Provider API, which is the second API. The REST API is only exposed by SQL API account. So if you are using the REST API on any other underlying APIs such as Mongo, Cassandra, or Gremlin, you will get a 404 error. So the way you access is by using the Cosmos DB endpoint, which you can grab from the Azure portal against your account. So you use the Cosmos DB endpoint and your master key or the primary key, and then you can consume the REST endpoint as the way you need. Under the hood, it is implemented via the .NET V2 SDK, so that developers do not need to care about the underlying technology, but if you are really interested, you can check the code which is open sourced on GitHub. Very briefly on the management API or the resource provider API, this is the one you typically use on Cosmos DB account, and also if you need to list down the keys or do the management operations. So this is the reference for the resource provider API which you can refer. This API supports all Cosmos DB API accounts such as CoSQL, Mongo, Cassandra, Table and Gremlin. For example, you can use this REST API to deploy any new account. It could be Mongo account, Cassandra account. Also, you can use this to list the keys and so on. The way to use this REST API is to use the management.azure.com URL and then you provide bunch of specifiers as you could see, and then you can see the subscription IDs and the API version. Also, this is already leveraged by the SDKs, Azure CLIs, and the portal also uses REST APIs for creating our underlying resources. So whenever you are writing ARM template or the bicep template, you really need to mention the API version, which you could see from the JSON that you are passing as the ARM template. The current latest version is the one that I have mentioned here. Also, you can refer the previous versions from the documentation. Alright, quick summary on REST API, and if you're wondering when to choose REST API and when to use the SDKs. This is sort of the developer perspective or my own perspective. Yes, you can use the REST APIs whenever the application that you're building, depending on the languages that doesn't have an SDK. Say, for example, if you're building an .NET, Java, Python, Golang, and then JavaScript application, we provide those SDKs out of the box. So we would recommend to use the SDKs that we already have. And if you are building some applications on Rust or the languages that we don't support on SDKs, you can certainly use the REST API. Also, you can choose the REST API if there is no other library or any other driver is not available, or even the ORM is not available for that particular Cosmos DB API. And the other reason is that maybe whenever you feel like not to use the SDK because of some of your company rules, and if you feel that you need to match with certain specific versions, then you can certainly go and use the REST API. We have seen the customers who are really using REST APIs for their particular scenarios. And also, if you are a third-party vendor and you want to re-implement some of our SDK capabilities, or you want to experiment and learn about REST APIs, then you can use the REST APIs. Being opinionated again, I would say no to REST APIs because we have a lot of resources for our native SDKs. Second important thing is that SDK incorporates some of the best practices which I will be covering in a separate video. Also, the SDKs are open source, so if you want to contribute or just if you want to see the implementation, you can check out on GitHub. From a developer perspective, if you do not want to reinvent the wheel, some of the fundamental things such as error handling, request diagnostics and retries are also part of the SDK, which I will be explaining in the best practices video. Also, we have parallelization out of the box when you are trying to execute queries in parallel. There are a lot more capabilities around bulk, batch, which are heavily available on the SDKs that we provide. Also, we have made a lot of investment on the engineering side. So you can see the integrated test, unit test, and for all the scenarios that we support. Finally, as I mentioned, the SDKs are open source. So you can follow the roadmap, inspect, and you can support us by contributing as well. So the summary here is that use the SDKs as much as you can and use the REST API when you check above these points that I explained earlier. Let me show a quick demo on the REST API. Alright, I have Postman here, which is widely used by developers to test out the REST API. The first thing is that environment variable. As you could see here, I have some of the environment variable configured, where you could see the master key, which you can fetch from the Cosmos DB account from the Azure portal, and then you have the endpoint URL, which is the account endpoint URL of your Cosmos DB account. And also there are certain things that you need to configure when it comes to testing the REST API. Here you could see something called authorization prerequest script, which is basically the access token that I'm generating in order to access my account using the master key. This is something that I have written as a blog, and then I have published a sample so that you can refer the same. So once you have set up these things, there are a list of supported operations which are available on the Cosmos DB REST API. As you could see, we support more than 25 operations, starting from listing the database and some of the management operations, such as replacing the throughput, and then you can delete document, delete collection, and then you can do some data plane operations such as querying the documentation. And one of the recent features that we add, patch documentation. So all these features are supported through the REST API. And if I have to show a demo quickly, this particular endpoint will list the database, and when I send a request, you can see the list of database for that particular account under this particular account URL that I pass. So you can see the list of databases, and then there is another thing that you can check as well, which is the request and response headers. So in the request headers, you can see the list of things like version, authorization, token, and the date. And also in the request response headers, you can see the content size, and also you can see the partition key and the request charge, which typically needed for any of the operations that you do on Cosmos DB, and then the number of regions this particular request has gone to, and things like that. So you would be able to analyze the related informations related to this particular request in the response headers. So that's a simple demo on the REST API. And also you can build any application with your favorite programming language and then use the REST APIs to talk to Cosmos DB. So in this case, I have used a simple .NET application, and I have made a request to list down the databases which I showed in the Postman, and this is how the response will look like. And using the same .NET application, I have made a request. You can see the request charge and the activity ID related to that particular request. So this is a simple demo that I wanted to show that you can use the REST API on any programming language to interact with Cosmos DB. Moving on, if you're wondering what languages you can use as a developer to talk to Cosmos DB, as I mentioned, in theory you can do it with any language, since we have the REST API support that modern programming languages regularly deals with. Also, one other thing from a developer perspective on which API you should choose as a developer to interact with Cosmos DB. These are the underlying APIs that I'm talking about. You should think from business and development aspect. As you might have learned from previous experience, when choosing the underlying API, you can consider the factors such as skill set that your team possesses, and also the hybrid support whenever you want to migrate the data from on-prem to cloud. So think of these aspects before choosing the underlying API. I will do a separate video on choosing the underlying APIs on Cosmos DB. If you are using SQL or the core API, we do have native built-in SDKs on various languages that should be the default option whenever you are interacting with Cosmos DB. And if you are choosing any of the other OSS APIs such as Cassandra or Mongo API or Gremlin, you can think of the existing tools and libraries that lets you to talk to Cosmos DB. And one of the reasons is that we let the developers to use the existing open source capabilities such as tools and libraries which are already available, so that we don't reinvent the wheel again, which I will be covering in a bit. Okay, talking about SDKs, these are the various SDKs that we support across various programming languages. I am not going to give a deep dive on each of them in detail. This is probably the complete developer experience. We have a lot of choices on each programming language. On .NET, we have 4 versions till now, starting from V2, which is still supported, but this will be retired by 2024, as mentioned in the documentation, which you can refer. But the recommendation is that do not use this for building new applications. In fact, if you are interacting with any other application developers who are using V2, ask them to migrate to V3. So V3 version is widely used by customers these days and provide it provides a lot of capabilities. One thing to call out is that bulk support, which is released as a separate library. Finally, we have the .NET V4, which is in preview for some time, but we will be making it GA in the coming months. While on the Java, we support two versions, V2, which has both support for sync and async. We do not recommend the new workloads to be built out of V2 as it's expected to retire soon. The current version is the V4, which has a lot of capabilities paired with .NET, which I explained earlier. Finally, we have both Node SDK with the version 3.15.2, which is the latest version as of now, and then we have the Python SDK 4.2.0. Recently we added this async IO support. So in our roadmap, we are trying to add all the common features across all languages. So there are a lot of investment coming to make the feature parity common across all these SDKs, so that developers can leverage any of the SDKs to interact with Cosmos DB. So you have a lot of choices there. Alright, on talking about SDKs, there are also some object relational mappers out there. As you know, Microsoft provides Entity Framework Core, that's an ORM that talks to different number of data sources. So it does have the capability to interact with Cosmos DB as well. For those who are not familiar with Entity Framework, it's an abstraction layer so that developers can keep working with familiar concepts instead of having to worry about how to translate those into database entities. Yes, it's very popular among .NET developers because it removes some of the database thinking from the developers. One thing about ORM is that it is very easy to store serialized data on Cosmos DB because of the fact that Cosmos DB being schema agnostic. Let's say you have a lengthy document with nested JSON embedded. It's very easy to store on Cosmos DB with a single line of code. Here is an example on C# code on how to serialize the JSON and then store it on Cosmos DB. One of the important thing about ORM is that majority of them are traditionally relational database centric. So most of the NoSQL databases ORMs have very limited support. So this is something that you need to think before using ORMs with Cosmos DB. Also, Entity Framework Core does support Cosmos DB, but it is limited to Core SQL API. That is another thing to remember. Also, there are fairly specific limitations which we have added in the documentation. So it's always better to go through the limitations before you start building your application using the Entity Framework Core. There are some third-party ORMs such as Hibernate, which is very popular in the Java world, and there is also JDBC driver, so that you can use those to talk to Cosmos DB as well. Finally, there are two libraries named Cosmonaut and Cosmic Graph, which you might have seen in the past, which is very heavily used among developers in the past. One of the things about these libraries is that even if you are using, or even if any of the customers are using, you can advise them to move away from these, as these are using the old .NET version of our SDKs, and these two libraries are not being maintained. This is something to consider whenever you are using these libraries. Alright, for the REST APIs on the Cosmos DB, apart from the Core SQL API, we recommend the customers to leverage the official drivers and tools that comes from the open source community. This is a good reference slide for all the APIs on Cosmos DB, such as Mongo API, Cassandra API, Gremlin API and Table API. I'm not going to deep dive into each of these. Basically, the takeaway is that you can use any of the native OSS drivers libraries to interact with OSS APIs such as Mongo, Cassandra and Gremlin. Just to highlight two things here, you need to refer the limitation documentation that we have for each API, and also review the differences whenever you are using the specific commands. For example, whenever you are using the native Mongo, and if you have moved to Cosmos DB Mongo API, we have certain recommendations on how to write specific commands. Make sure to follow those limitations. Some of these libraries mentioned here are very popular among developers and the open source community. So as I mentioned earlier, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel whenever we see that developers are heavily using the open source tools and libraries. So it is fairly easy to build your application if you are using any of these libraries. Also, in case of Cassandra, you can use the Cassandra data stacks driver or Spring Data and for Gremlin you can use the Apache Tinkertop and so on. And especially with the table API, we do have the SDKs on different languages that we support, similar to the core SQL API, or you can use the Azure Storage REST API for the table API to interact on Cosmos DB. This is a quick summary of the tools and libraries that you can use to interact with Cosmos DB's underlying APIs, especially the open source APIs, Mongo, Cassandra and Gremlin. Moving on, Spring Data support for Cosmos DB is based on Spring Data Framework. This is heavily used by the enterprise customers who have standardized on Spring, and that's why we have a managed service on Azure called as Azure Spring. You can use the Spring Data with your Java application to talk to Cosmos DB as well. So these are the various ways to interact with Cosmos DB. Initially I talked about the REST API, then I spoke about underlying SDKs that we have on various programming languages for the core API, and then I spoke about what are the tools and libraries that you can use natively for the open source APIs and the table API. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will be using these libraries in future or whenever you are building applications using Cosmos DB. In the next video, I will be covering some of the common problems and best practices on the SDKs that we provide for the SQL API. Until then, stay safe.